The mansion was quiet, almost unnaturally so, as Dominic Alcott stepped through the double doors, his polished shoes clicking softly against the marble floor. The early evening sun stretched long shadows across the pristine foyer, highlighting the geometric perfection of his life, or at least what he thought was perfect. He expected the usual, the faint scent of his favorite cologne lingering in the air, the distant laughter of the triplets carried faintly from the nursery, the orderly hum of domesticity. Yet something felt off, a subtle deviation from the routine that dominated his household like clockwork. Dominic loosened his tie, surveying the familiar surroundings with the trained eye of a man who built empires from numbers and strategy. The walls, adorned with art he could barely name, felt quieter than usual. The faint hum of the kitchen refrigerator was the only background noise, but even that seemed diminished, as if the house itself held its breath. He reached for the staircase railing, smooth under his hand, and ascended, his mind wandering to the day's meetings. Stock reports, mergers, and the endless treadmill of power. Yet no spreadsheet, no boardroom confrontation, not even the gnawing weight of ambition could distract him from the subtle unease settling in the pit of his stomach. Upstairs, the nursery was unusually still. Dominic's gaze lingered on the crib where his triplets, little sparks of chaos bound by mischievous perfection, should have been squirming, building miniature worlds out of blocks and blankets. Elena, the maid, moved with practiced grace, her hands steady as she tucked one of the children in. Dominic's eyes, usually sharp with impatience, softened as he watched her. There was an effortless authority in the way she handled the triplets, a quiet command that went unnoticed by everyone else but him. She wasn't just a caretaker. She was a strategist in miniature form, anticipating the needs and whims of the three little beings without a word spoken. And yet, despite her calm, something in her posture betrayed tension, a subtle tightness at the corners of her eyes. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, his presence unnoticed, and studied the scene. The triplets' tiny hands clutched the edges of their blankets, eyes wide and expectant. Elena hummed softly, a tune he didn't recognize, but its notes lingered in the air like a whisper meant for no one but them. The hush was comforting, yet alien. He frowned. He had returned early. Elena always prepared dinner at exactly 6, bathed the children at exactly 7, read their stories at precisely 7:30. Nothing ever varied. And yet tonight, everything was off by minutes he could feel in his bones. The faint hum of the house, the children's unusual silence, the way Elena paused mid-motion, it all carried the weight of something unseen, a prelude to an unknown disturbance. "Dinner will be ready shortly," Elena said without looking up, as if she had sensed his scrutiny. Her voice was calm, controlled, but Dominic caught the slight tremor beneath it, the edge of urgency she tried to mask. He studied her face, the way the low light danced across her features, highlighting determination, caution, and— was that fear? The thought made him stiffen. Elena feared something. But what? And why was she hiding it from him? Dominic wandered deeper into the nursery, his eyes falling on the scattered toys that seemed oddly organized. Each block, each plush animal, had been placed deliberately, creating patterns he could almost decipher. It was meticulous, almost obsessive, but somehow comforting. He reached to adjust a leaning stack of blocks, and a small note slipped from between them, falling at his feet. He picked it up, the handwriting jagged, hurried. It read only, "Not now. Please don't look." His pulse quickened. He didn't recognize the handwriting, though he knew every script in his home. The delivery slips, his own notes, the triplets' scribbles. This was different, urgent, secret. He tucked the note into his pocket and moved silently toward the master hallway, noticing details that had always been background noise. The slightly ajar door to the office, the flicker of light under the guest room, the faint clatter of something rolling across the floor above the usual nursery hum. Every small detail, the shift in shadows, the off-kilter positioning of the furniture, spoke to him in a language he hadn't realized he knew. Something had changed, something beyond his schedule, beyond his control. Dominic's instincts, honed over years of negotiating boardrooms and anticipating rivals' moves, told him to investigate, to probe, but a deeper, more personal sense, the protective, paternal side he rarely acknowledged, urged caution. He could feel the triplets' eyes on him, as if tiny, silent observers of every subtle movement, waiting for a misstep. He wanted to call Elena out, demand an explanation, assert his authority, but instead he lingered, listening. From somewhere deeper in the mansion, a faint click echoed, a door closing or perhaps a lock engaging. He froze. The sound was deliberate, not accidental. And then he saw it. A shadow flitted past the partially open door at the end of the hall. Quick, precise, purposeful. Dominic's heart thudded in his chest. He had never seen anyone move like that in his home. Not a staff member, not a visitor. The movement didn't belong, and yet it was perfectly integrated into the rhythm of the house. Someone was here, or had been here, and they didn't want to be seen. Dominic approached slowly, each step deliberate, measuring the risk. The air carried a faint scent. Lavender, perhaps, but faintly metallic beneath it, like something freshly disturbed. His gaze caught a reflection in the polished hardwood floor. A figure, moving with unnatural precision, paused as if aware of his attention. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. He reached the door, half expecting to find a hidden intruder, perhaps a thief or a prankster child, but found nothing. Only a faint scuff mark on the polished wood, the trace of hurried movement, and the lingering echo of a presence he could not identify. His mind raced. Was it Elena, one of the children, or someone else entirely? Dominic stepped back, his rational side telling him it was likely nothing, that he was overreacting, letting fatigue and stress paint shadows where there were none. But another part of him, the part that had built empires from intuition and anticipation, knew better. Something was happening in his home, something he wasn't meant to see, and it had begun long before he had returned early. He turned back to the nursery. The triplets were asleep, their breaths even, innocent, unaware of the undercurrents flowing through their home. Elena stood in the doorway, composed as ever, but her shoulders were tense, her gaze fixed somewhere beyond the walls. She hadn't noticed him yet, or perhaps she had, and was choosing not to react. Either way, the unspoken tension between them was palpable. Dominic's hand rested lightly on the doorknob. He wanted answers, explanations, certainty. But in that perfect, quiet moment, he realized he was stepping into something far larger than misplaced notes or fleeting shadows. A storm was gathering in the corners of his meticulously ordered world, and he had glimpsed its first subtle tendrils. And then, as he peered toward the hallway once more, he saw it, a figure crouched in the shadows of the staircase, motionless, observing. It was not Elena. It was someone else. Dominic froze, every instinct screaming at him to move, to confront, to flee. But before he could react, the figure vanished entirely. leaving behind only the echo of their presence and the faintest trace of movement on the polished floor. Dominic's breath caught in his chest. He had no idea who or what he had just seen. But one thing was certain. The calm before the storm had ended. Something was stirring in the quiet, and it was waiting for him to make a move. Dominic bent to inspect the faint footprints left behind, tiny, deliberate, and far too precise to belong to anyone he knew. And then he noticed a single folded note resting atop the nursery dresser, with handwriting he didn't recognize. "You shouldn't have come home early." Dominic stared at the folded note on the nursery dresser, the sharp edges of the paper pressing into his palm like a physical reminder of intrusion. His mind raced, trying to reconcile the surreal calm of the room with the warning before him. He hadn't moved a muscle since discovering it, his eyes darting between the note, the sleeping triplets, and Elena, who still stood by the doorway, composed yet subtly tense. She had not touched the note, nor made any effort to react, as if she neither feared it nor wished to acknowledge it. The triplets shifted slightly in their sleep, tiny hands clutching blankets, and Dominic's gaze softened involuntarily. Despite the undercurrent of danger, the sight anchored him, reminding him why he tolerated the chaos of his home. Their laughter, their cries, the small victories of childhood he had missed for years in the name of ambition. He took a slow breath, folding the note carefully, tucking it into his pocket. For now he needed to observe, to gather information, not act impulsively. "Dominic?" Elena's voice, soft yet firm, drew his attention. She had moved a few steps closer, her hands clasped in front of her, posture impeccable. "Is everything all right?" There was a faint tremor beneath her calm, a tiny ripple that betrayed the careful mask she wore. He studied her, noting the subtle signs, the slight flush along her jaw, the nervous tapping of her thumb against her wrist, the way her gaze occasionally flicked toward the hallway where the shadow had vanished. She was hiding something, not the kind of secret born from mischief or fear, but one rooted in careful planning, protective instinct, and perhaps danger. "I don't know," Dominic admitted, his voice quieter than intended. "I came home early and found unusual things. Movements, notes, shadows." He paused, letting the words settle, observing her reaction. Elena's expression remained calm, but her eyes flickered, betraying more than she let slip. "I need to understand what's happening here." She nodded once, slowly. "You will," she said. Her voice carried an almost imperceptible warning. "But some things are not meant to be discovered too quickly." Dominic's pulse quickened. There was a rhythm to her speech, a cadence meant to delay, to test. She wasn't lying, at least not intentionally, but she was keeping something from him, and the very thought both frustrated and intrigued him. He stepped closer to the crib where the triplets slept. One of them stirred, letting out a soft whimper, and Elena immediately reached out, tucking a stray blanket back over the child. "Shh. It's all right," she whispered, voice tender, almost melodic. Dominic watched, fascinated by her efficiency, the way she managed not only the children's needs, but the invisible currents of tension flowing through the room. It was a kind of strength he had never possessed, a moral courage cloaked in domesticity. "What are you protecting them from?" he asked, more to himself than to her. But Elena heard. Her hand froze mid-air, and she turned fully to face him, eyes sharp now, scrutinizing his every move. "From things they shouldn't see," she replied carefully. "From dangers that don't belong to their age. You wouldn't understand, Dominic." Her words pricked at him. He had spent years mastering the corporate battlefield, predicting moves, negotiating threats, understanding risks, and yet here, in his own home, he realized that he was dangerously naive. The dangers she hinted at were not corporate. They were personal, intimate, and possibly perilous for his children. A twinge of guilt clawed at him. He had left them in the care of someone else while he built his empire, never realizing the quiet heroism unfolding under his roof. Dominic's eyes narrowed, scanning the room for clues. On the far side of the nursery, a small toy chest sat slightly ajar. He approached it cautiously, lifting the lid to reveal not toys, but a collection of objects that seemed oddly deliberate. Miniature locks, photographs of the triplets from days he didn't recall taking, and a few items of his own: an old watch, a cufflink, and a folded piece of paper with a scribbled address. His pulse accelerated. Elena had been organizing, planning, preparing for something he hadn't anticipated. He looked up, startled, catching Elena's gaze. "Why is this here?" he demanded softly, aware of the intensity in his own tone. Elena exhaled, a small sound almost like resignation. "Because I must," she said. "You were absent. And some threats. They arrive without warning." Dominic's mind raced. Threats? Against whom? Against the children? Against him? He didn't know whether to feel anger, relief, or fear. He wanted to reach out, to demand answers, to assert control. But a part of him, the part that had glimpsed the shadow on the stairs, knew that doing so recklessly could be dangerous. As if sensing his hesitation, Lena stepped closer. "Dominic, you've always believed control means knowing everything, seeing everything," she said gently, yet with an edge. "But sometimes protecting those you love means letting them be unaware. You can't see everything, and you shouldn't. Not yet." Dominic's fists clenched. He hated being denied information, hated feeling powerless. And yet, something in her eyes, something in the steadiness of her hands as she adjusted a blanket over a sleeping triplet, made him pause. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't hiding for herself. She was hiding to protect them. He stepped back, his frustration colliding with an unfamiliar admiration. I didn't realize," he admitted finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "I've been so focused on everything else, I didn't see you working to keep them safe." Elena's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's all right," she said. "That's why I'm here." For a long moment, silence fell, the quiet punctuated only by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the hall. Dominic allowed himself to relax, but the calm was deceptive. His instincts still screamed that the shadow on the staircase, the note on the dresser, and the small collection of items in the toy chest were not coincidences. The house had become a stage for something far larger, and he had stumbled onto it too early. He returned to the hallway, stepping lightly, eyes scanning. A door at the far end, normally closed, was slightly ajar. Dominic's curiosity, mingled with a growing sense of unease, drew him closer. As he approached, he noticed something he hadn't before. A small, personal photograph on the floor, half hidden beneath the rug. He knelt to examine it, recognizing instantly the smiling face of his younger self alongside a woman he barely remembered. A figure from his past, someone connected to family secrets he had long buried. The photograph had been torn from an album, hastily folded and discarded, and yet the handwriting on the back sent a chill down his spine. "It's time you remembered." Dominic's breath caught. This was no longer just about shadows or notes. Someone, or something, was deliberately connecting him to his past, to memories he had long tried to suppress. And suddenly, the quiet mansion felt smaller, suffocating, as if it had shrunk around the magnitude of secrets waiting to resurface. He turned sharply, half expecting Elena, half expecting an intruder. But the hallway remained empty. Only the soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of floorboards, and the distant breathing of sleeping children filled the space. Dominic's mind spun with questions he had no answers for. The calm of the evening had been shattered, replaced by a creeping tension he couldn't yet name. And then, from somewhere above the stairs, a faint whisper reached his ears, a voice too soft to identify, but unmistakably there. "You shouldn't be here." Dominic froze. His pulse thundered in his chest. He knew instinctively that someone had been watching him, waiting, and whatever was coming next would not be subtle. A shadow moved across the top of the staircase, just beyond the landing. Dominic's eyes locked on it, heart hammering, as he realized the intruder, or observer, was aware of him. And before he could react, the faint whisper echoed again. "Next time, you won't leave so easily." Dominic stood frozen at the bottom of the staircase, his gaze locked on the shadow that had moved just out of reach. The whisper lingered in his ears, soft yet precise. "Next time, you won't leave so easily." He swallowed hard, heart hammering, as he tried to piece together what he had just witnessed. The air felt heavier now, charged with anticipation, as if the very walls of the mansion were waiting for him to make a mistake. He took a careful step forward, then another, each one measured, alert. The faint scent of lavender, mixed with something sharper, metallic, still hung in the air, evidence that someone had been here recently, someone with intent. Dominic's mind raced through possibilities. Intruder, stalker, corporate spy. And yet the house was secure. The locks, the cameras, the alarms, everything was supposedly under his control. But he had been wrong. "Dominic?" Elena's voice, quiet yet steady, broke through his thoughts. She had appeared behind him without a sound, her presence almost ghost-like. He turned sharply, expecting anger, accusation, or panic, but found only calm vigilance. "You need to be careful," she said softly. "There are people watching, more than you realize." Dominic's chest tightened. "Watching? How? Who?" Elena hesitated, then gestured toward the staircase. "They've been here before you arrived. They leave traces, subtle, footprints, misplaced objects, noises meant to be dismissed. I've been trying to shield the children, but—" Her gaze flicked to the sleeping triplets, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Sometimes the danger is closer than we think." Dominic's mind churned. Danger in his own home. Danger to his children. He had always believed that wealth and meticulous planning could shield him from the world. But the evidence before him suggested otherwise. Elena wasn't just a maid. She was a guardian navigating a minefield he hadn't even known existed, and he had been blind to it. He moved toward the nursery again, needing to ground himself, needing to see the triplets safe. The room was unchanged, but the faint sense of unease lingered. Dominic's gaze fell on the toy chest, still slightly ajar. The collection of objects, locks, photographs, and notes, seemed innocuous at first, but now each item carried a weight of warning. He picked up the folded paper with the scribbled address, turning it over in his hands. It was a location he recognized vaguely, a name from his past, someone connected to the family, someone he hadn't thought of in years. "Why is this here?" he demanded, his voice sharper this time. Elena stepped closer, her eyes meeting his with unwavering resolve. Because someone is planning, she said quietly. And I can't let them reach the children. Not while you're unaware. Dominic's stomach knotted. He had been absent, absorbed in work, meetings, and ambition, while someone or some group had been quietly undermining his household. And Elena had been silently managing it all, protecting the triplets from dangers he didn't even know existed. The realization hit him with a mix of guilt, admiration, and fear. Who? He pressed, pacing the length of the room. Who is doing this? How long have they? Elena shook her head. You're not ready for that yet. Knowing too much too soon will put everyone at risk. Trust me, Dominic. Let me handle this for now. Dominic stopped. Trust. It was a word he had never used lightly, and one he rarely extended. But here, in the dim light of the nursery, he saw the truth in her eyes, the careful, calculated, unwavering dedication to the safety of his children. He wanted to protest, to assert control, but a quiet voice inside him whispered that she was right. Patience, observation, strategic action. He sank into a nearby chair, running a hand through his hair. The mansion felt suddenly unfamiliar. The corridors stretched longer, the shadows deeper. Every door, every hallway could conceal a threat. Every familiar face could be hiding an agenda. His empire, built on knowledge and control, had failed him here, and he hated that realization. The faint hum of the refrigerator was joined by a new sound, a soft click, almost imperceptible, from the far end of the hall. Dominic froze, every muscle tense. The shadow from the staircase, the whisper, the note, the footprints, all were converging into a single, undeniable truth. Someone was inside his home, someone who knew his routines, his weaknesses, and possibly his children. He rose cautiously, moving toward the sound, each step deliberate. Elena followed silently, her presence a stabilizing force. They reached the end of the hall, where the door to the office was slightly open. Dominic peered inside. Nothing, just the familiar order of his workspace. Desk polished, papers neatly stacked, awards gleaming under the soft light. Yet the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He could sense it, the invisible eyes tracking, waiting. Suddenly, a note slipped from the gap under the office door. Dominic picked it up, heart racing. Written in the same hurried, unfamiliar handwriting as the first, it read, "Stop asking questions. Some truths are more dangerous than ignorance." Dominic's jaw tightened. Whoever had left this knew him intimately. They understood his instincts, his curiosity, his compulsion to uncover secrets, and they were using it against him. Elena placed a hand on his arm. "They're testing you," she said softly, "seeing how much you know, how far you'll go. But every move you make now is dangerous. Every step." Dominic's mind raced. He wanted to storm the house, to hunt down the intruder, to assert control over every shadow, every whisper. But logic and fear intertwined, urging restraint. He realized he was being drawn into a web, carefully spun, precise, inescapable. And if he moved too quickly, too rashly, he could jeopardize not just himself, but the children. He paced, trying to anticipate the next move. A memory surfaced, one of the rare evenings he had spent with the triplets, watching them play, laughing as they created imaginary worlds from blocks and blankets. The simplicity of that moment clashed violently with the tension now threading through his home. Something had intruded into that innocence, and Elena had been the unseen shield protecting it. Dominic's gaze fell to a small table near the staircase. A framed photograph of the triplets, taken by Elena weeks ago, seemed to stare back at him, almost accusingly. She had always known, always prepared, always acted without hesitation. And yet, he had almost dismissed her as just another employee, unaware of the depth of her vigilance. A sudden noise upstairs, footsteps, deliberate and soft, made Dominic spin. The shadow moved again across the landing, pausing as if aware he was watching. This time it lingered, observing him, waiting. Dominic's breath caught. The intruder, or observer, was testing him, assessing him, measuring his responses. Elena stepped closer. "You're in danger, Dominic," she said, voice low. "And so are the children. Whoever this is, they're not random. They have purpose, and they know exactly how to manipulate you." Dominic clenched his fists, the tension coiling through him like a spring. He realized, with a sinking clarity, that the web he had stumbled into was not accidental. Every note, every shadow, every whispered warning had been orchestrated, and now he had a choice. Continue blindly, risking everything, or begin to unravel the threads with caution, strategy, and, perhaps, trust in Elena. He took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing his racing heart to settle. The calm of the nursery, the innocence of the triplets, the silent presence of Elena. They were the stakes now. He had been drawn into something larger than himself, something invisible yet palpable, and every decision from this moment forward would carry consequences. Then, from the top of the staircase, a new sound, so faint it could have been imagined, echoed through the hall. A whisper, close enough that it grazed his ear. "Curiosity will cost you more than you think." Dominic froze. He knew in that instant that the web was tightening, the trap closing, and the next move could change everything. As he glanced up, a figure emerged at the top of the staircase, someone familiar yet impossible in that context. Their eyes met his, and a shiver ran down his spine. The voice, low and deliberate, said, "I told you, stop looking, or someone will pay." Dominic's pulse thundered in his chest as he stared at the figure at the top of the staircase. Familiar yet impossible. It was someone he thought long removed from his life, someone he hadn't seen in years. The dim light of the hallway made their face partially shadowed, but the intensity in their eyes cut through everything else. He could feel the weight of their gaze, as if they were calculating his every move, every thought, every hesitation. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice firm, though the unease threading through him made it tremble slightly. The figure didn't move, didn't answer immediately. They simply watched, silent, deliberate, waiting for him to react. Finally, a low voice, cold and precise, reached him. "You shouldn't have come home early, Dominic." "You've crossed a line!" Dominic's instincts screamed danger. He glanced toward the nursery. Elena had subtly stepped between him and the stairs, positioning herself protectively in front of the sleeping triplets. Her presence was calm, but her eyes betrayed readiness. She was preparing for the possibility of confrontation. Dominic's admiration for her courage clashed with a new, urgent fear. "Back off," he said, attempting control, his voice sharper. "This is my home. You don't get to threaten anyone here." The figure tilted their head, faint amusement flickering across features Dominic had thought forgotten. "Your home? Is that what you call it? This house has been under surveillance long before you returned." The words hit him like a cold gust. Surveillance? Who else had been inside his private world? How long had someone been watching, planning, manipulating events under his nose? Dominic's mind raced. Everything he had assumed about control, security, and protection crumbled. His life, so meticulously organized, so seemingly invulnerable, was suddenly exposed to hidden threats he hadn't anticipated. And the triplets, innocent and unaware, were at the center of it. Elena placed a firm hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Dominic, don't respond impulsively. They want to provoke you. They're testing boundaries. They want to see how far you'll go. He swallowed hard, recognizing the wisdom in her warning. But the temptation to act, to confront, to assert control was nearly irresistible. Dominic had always been a man of action, of precision, of decisive moves. Now, in the intimate confines of his home, he realized the stakes were higher than ever. I need to know what's happening, he said, voice low, determined. Who is doing this? Why? And what do they want? The figure on the staircase shifted slightly, as though weighing whether to answer. You don't get to demand answers yet. You were absent when the real threats arrived. You ignored the signs. And now, you're in their path. Dominic's stomach knotted. He felt the walls of his home constricting around him, the floorboards creaking under invisible tension. He had spent years building an empire, controlling every variable, every angle, every potential risk. And yet here, in his own house, he was powerless. Elena's voice cut through his spiraling thoughts. Dominic, they are not just testing you. They are watching your reactions to everything. Your control, your fear, your attachment to the children. Every move you make is data for them to exploit. You cannot confront them head-on. Not yet. Dominic hesitated, wrestling with pride, fear, and responsibility. He had always believed action solved problems, that boldness defeated uncertainty. But Elena's words carried weight, rooted in experience and foresight. She had been managing threats he didn't even know existed, protecting what he had neglected. His family, the children, the fragile world he had assumed was under his control. I understand, he said slowly, forcing calm into his voice. But I cannot ignore this either. I cannot let them manipulate my home, my children, my family. Elena nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Then you have a choice. Continue blindly and risk everything, or begin to investigate carefully, strategically, without revealing your knowledge too soon. Once you act, there is no turning back. Dominic's chest tightened. He knew she was right. This wasn't just a minor intrusion or harmless test. This was deliberate, calculated, and dangerous. He had crossed a line simply by noticing, by reacting, by questioning. From this moment forward, he would be an active participant. He would investigate, and in doing so, he risked the safety of everyone in his household. He glanced at the triplets, sleeping peacefully, innocent of the storm gathering around them. A wave of determination surged through him. He would not let anyone harm them, not while he drew breath. Not while Elena, the unseen shield, had kept them safe for so long. Dominic turned back to the staircase, eyes narrowing. If you think I will be intimidated, think again, he said, voice firm, unwavering. I will find out who you are. I will uncover the truth, and I will protect my family. The figure tilted their head again, a subtle smirk forming in the shadows. Bold words, but knowing the path does not make it safe to walk. You will learn. Consequences are never far behind. Before Dominic could respond, they vanished. One moment, they were there, poised, deliberate, and the next, gone. Only the faint echo of footsteps remained, reverberating through the silent hall. Dominic's stomach tightened. The house had become unfamiliar, a maze of shadows and whispered threats, and he had just stepped into the first trap. Elena placed a steadying hand on his arm. They've retreated, for now, but this was a warning. The next move will be more direct, more dangerous. You must be ready. Dominic exhaled slowly, forcing a semblance of calm. Then we prepare. We observe. We anticipate. I will not be caught off guard again. She nodded, her eyes reflecting both approval and concern. Good, but remember, every action now carries weight. One wrong step could cost everything we've protected. Dominic's gaze swept the hallway, scanning shadows, doors, and corridors with a new intensity. Every corner could conceal threats. Every familiar face could mask intentions. He had entered a game far larger than he had anticipated, one that extended beyond his knowledge and authority. And yet, for the first time in a long while, he felt alive. Not just commanding boardrooms, not just controlling empires, but truly awake to the stakes of life itself. He made his way to the nursery once more, standing quietly by the crib. The triplets slept, oblivious to the dangers circling them. Elena moved silently among them, checking blankets, adjusting pillows, maintaining the fragile equilibrium of safety. Dominic watched, learning from her, absorbing the lessons of patience, observation, and silent courage. He had always believed protection came from control. Now he realized it could also come from vigilance, foresight, and quiet bravery. And as he lingered there, he felt the weight of inevitability settle in. The shadow on the staircase, the whispered warnings, the mysterious notes, all pointed to the same conclusion. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. He had crossed the threshold from passive observer to active participant. The safety of his family, the balance of his home, and perhaps even his own survival depended on what he did next. A soft click echoed from the far hallway, different from before, deliberate, precise. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound, instinct screaming that someone had returned. He froze, ears straining, and then, from the darkness at the top of the stairs, a single voice, cold, controlled, impossibly familiar, echoed once more. You've chosen to play. Now you'll see the cost. Dominic's stomach dropped. This was no longer a warning. This was the first move of a game he could not yet understand. From the nursery doorway, Elena stiffened, eyes narrowing. A shadow moved across the hallway, too fast, too precise to be human. And Dominic realized, with a sinking clarity, that the intruder had made their first real attempt to breach the heart of his home. Dominic paced the nursery doorway, his mind spinning with strategies, contingencies, and possibilities. Every shadow, every creak, every faint movement in the house now carried significance. The intruder's recent activity, the shadow at the top of the stairs, the whispered threats, the notes scattered like breadcrumbs, had forced him into a new reality. He was no longer merely the observer. He was a participant in a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than ever. Elena remained calm beside him, watching his every move with the kind of vigilance that only years of experience could cultivate. Dominic studied her closely, the contrast between her composed presence and the storm raging inside him striking. She wasn't just protecting the children. She was guiding him through this invisible battlefield, anticipating threats before he even recognized them. And yet, Dominic's ego resisted the idea that someone else could outmaneuver him in his own home. "I need to know the truth," Dominic said quietly, eyes scanning the nursery and then the hallway. I need to understand who's behind this. Who's watching? Who's manipulating? Everything. Elena nodded, acknowledging the necessity. There's a way to find out, she said carefully. But you must act carefully. One misstep, one wrong confrontation, and it could all collapse. Are you ready? Dominic straightened, determination hardening his expression. I'm ready. She led him silently to the office, where the first series of clues had surfaced. The folded papers, the photographs, the notes in unfamiliar handwriting. Together, they began to piece the puzzle, comparing handwriting, cross-referencing addresses, and analyzing patterns of intrusion. Dominic's mind raced, connecting dots he had previously ignored. Noticing subtle inconsistencies in the daily routines and minor anomalies he had dismissed as coincidence. Hours passed in tense concentration. The house seemed to shift around them, the shadows deeper, the silence heavier. Dominic's pulse quickened with each revelation. Elena's meticulous preparation became increasingly clear. She had anticipated every move of the intruder, every pattern of surveillance, every attempt to unsettle him. And then, finally, the breakthrough came. A photograph tucked behind a stack of papers showed the intruder, unmistakable this time, at a location connected to his family's old business dealings. The handwriting on a note in the photograph matched the notes left in his home. A name surfaced, a rival from the corporate world, someone who had a long-standing grudge against Dominic, and, more importantly, had the means to infiltrate his personal life. Dominic's heart leapt. He felt a rush of vindication, a surge of control returning to him. This was it. The culprit had been identified. He had uncovered the thread, traced it to its source, and finally had leverage. He turned to Elena, triumph in his eyes. "We've got him," Dominic said, voice firm, confident. "This is the person behind all of this. The notes, the shadows, the intrusions. It's all him. We can confront him. End this now." Elena's eyes flickered with something Dominic didn't immediately recognize. A hesitation, a shadow of concern. But she nodded slowly. "Be careful," she warned. "The surface is only what you see. There's more beneath it." Dominic ignored her caution, driven by the rush of perceived victory. He had been underestimated, doubted, manipulated, and now he held the key to ending the threat. With deliberate steps, he retrieved his phone and began drafting a confrontation, outlining where, when, and how he would confront the rival. Everything had to be precise, controlled, unavoidable. He was confident in his plan. Later that evening, as the triplets slept and the house was bathed in soft lamplight, Dominic executed the confrontation. He called the rival, framing his words carefully, controlling the conversation with authority and precision. Every response, every hesitation, every slip in their tone reinforced his belief. He had them cornered. "Your games end tonight," Dominic said, voice low and unwavering. "I know everything. You've been watching, plotting, manipulating. But it stops now. I will protect my family, my home, and my life." A pause on the other end of the line, then laughter. Slow, measured, chilling. "Do you really think it's that simple?" The voice taunted. "You've only seen what I wanted you to see. And now, you're walking right into the trap I set." Dominic froze, heart pounding. A chill ran down his spine, but he refused to show doubt. "What are you talking about?" The laughter continued, growing colder. "Every move you've made tonight, every step you've taken, all predicted, all anticipated. You think this was your victory? No, This is exactly what I wanted you to do. Dominic's stomach knotted. The moment of triumph evaporated, replaced by a sinking dread. The pieces he had believed fit neatly together were, in fact, part of a much larger puzzle, one carefully arranged to mislead him, to give him false confidence, to manipulate him into exposing himself. Elena stepped forward, her eyes meeting his with urgency. "I warned you," she said quietly. "The victory you think you have, it's an illusion. They've been manipulating everything you see, every clue, every shadow, every note. It was designed to make you act rashly, to make you believe you were in control." Dominic clenched his fists, frustration and fear colliding. "Then what do we do?" She placed a steadying hand on his arm. "We slow down. We observe. We think further than they anticipate. But the first lesson, never assume a victory until you've verified every layer." The realization hit him with the weight of a sledgehammer. He had been played. Every step of the investigation, every clue he had celebrated, had been carefully planted to lure him into overconfidence. And now he had revealed more about his strategies, his assumptions, and his instincts than he had realized. A sudden noise in the hallway jolted them both. A soft, deliberate click, followed by the faint scrape of movement. Dominic's eyes snapped to the staircase where shadows twisted unnaturally, stretching across the walls. His breath caught. The intruder, or intruders, were inside, observing, anticipating. Every move he made now was being watched, analyzed, exploited. The children stirred in the nursery, sensing tension but too young to understand. Elena moved quickly, gently ushering them back to their beds, maintaining calm while scanning the shadows. Dominic felt a pang of helplessness. He had been so close to thinking he had regained control, only to realize the web was far more intricate, far more dangerous than he had imagined. He stepped toward the hallway, determination hardening his resolve. "We can't stop now," he said, voice low but resolute. "If they've been manipulating us, then we have to outmaneuver them. Carefully, strategically. We don't act rashly, but we act decisively." Elena nodded. "Yes, but the next move, it must be ours entirely. Otherwise, they will lead us where they want. And Dominic, it will cost more than you think." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every misstep could endanger the triplets, the household, even his own life. The false victory had been a cruel lesson. Trust too quickly, and the consequences could be catastrophic. A faint rustling from the far hallway caught his attention. Dominic's head snapped toward the sound. A shadow flickered past the doorway, too fast, too precise to be anyone he recognized. His pulse thundered. The intruder had returned, testing him again, watching for reactions. As Dominic moved to intercept, a whisper drifted from the darkness, chilling him to the bone. "Congratulations. You found the clues we wanted you to find. But now, you're trapped." And in that instant, he realized the house he thought he controlled was no longer his. Dominic sank into the armchair in the nursery, the weight of failure pressing down on him like a leaden fog. The triplets slept peacefully, unaware of the invisible storm raging just beyond their crib. Elena moved quietly among them, adjusting blankets, checking pillows, and maintaining the fragile equilibrium that kept the children safe. Dominic's hands trembled slightly as he rubbed his face, frustration and fear colliding in a chaotic whirlwind. He had believed he had discovered the truth. The rival, the photographs, the notes, they all seemed to point to a single tangible enemy. And yet, Tonight had proven the exact opposite. The confrontation, the false victory, had been a trap. Every step he had taken, every assumption he had made, had been anticipated, manipulated, and used against him. The illusion of control he had clung to so desperately had evaporated, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and powerless. Elena watched him closely, her expression calm yet heavy with concern. "Dominic," she said softly, "you're exhausted. You've been chasing shadows, and now you've walked into the one they wanted you to find. We need to pause, breathe, and think carefully. Otherwise—" Her voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken consequences hanging in the air. Dominic leaned back, staring at the ceiling as memories surfaced unbidden. Fragments of the past he had long buried. He thought of his parents, the cutthroat business world they had raised him in, the lessons he had absorbed about power, control, and survival. He remembered the nights spent alone in this very house, watching shadows, worrying about the world, believing he could anticipate every threat. And now, for the first time, he realized he had been naive. The rules he had learned did not apply here. Not to this intruder. Not to the threats that moved unseen through his home. And not to the delicate balance of the family he had left in Elena's care. A sharp sound jolted him from his thoughts. A faint click, followed by the distant scrape of movement. His pulse spiked. Someone was inside again, testing, observing, playing with him like a predator with a cornered animal. Dominic's stomach twisted. He had lost ground, allowed overconfidence to cloud his judgment, and now he faced the consequences. He rose slowly, moving toward the hallway, trying to ground himself, to focus. But every shadow seemed heavier, every creak more deliberate, every faint whisper more threatening. The house that had once been a sanctuary now felt alien, a labyrinth designed to confuse, manipulate, and trap him. Elena followed, her eyes sharp, scanning for threats he could not yet detect. "We need to think differently," she said quietly. "The path you've been following isn't the real one. You've been looking at the wrong threads, chasing shadows of the truth instead of the core. That's why they've outmaneuvered you." Dominic frowned. "What do you mean?" She gestured to the scattered notes and photographs, to the traces of the intruder's movements, to the minor inconsistencies he had overlooked in his haste. "You've been interpreting clues at face value. Every shadow, every note, every footprint. You assumed they were what they seemed. But the intruder has been feeding you false trails. The real motive, the real target, and the real threat. You've been looking in the wrong direction entirely." Dominic's mind reeled. He had been so focused on the surface, on the most obvious suspect, that he had missed the underlying pattern. Every false lead, every carefully placed clue was designed to keep him busy, distracted, and ultimately powerless. And the intruder had succeeded. He sank onto the staircase, resting his elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "I've failed," he admitted quietly, more to himself than to Elena. "I thought I had control. I thought I understood, but I've only been reacting, following their script, and I've endangered everything in the process." Elena knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not everything," she said gently. "You still have the triplets, and you still have me. And there's one piece you've overlooked. Something they didn't anticipate." Dominic raised his head, eyes sharp now despite exhaustion. "What piece?" She reached into the folds of the toy chest, retrieving a small, unassuming object. It was a key, a simple brass key worn with age. "This," she said, holding it out, "this opens more than a door. It opens the understanding of who we're really dealing with. The path they've hidden, the motive they've disguised. It's here. You just have to see it differently." Dominic took the key, turning it over in his hand, feeling the weight of possibility and revelation. Suddenly, everything shifted in his mind. The photographs, the notes, the false leads, the intruder's behavior. The pieces he had dismissed as irrelevant, minor, or misleading now gained significance. The key was not a literal solution, but a metaphorical one. It represented the overlooked angle, the hidden truth, the one detail that had evaded him until now. A memory surged unexpectedly. A fleeting moment from his childhood, a phrase spoken by his father that had seemed trivial at the time. "Not everything you see is what it appears to be." The words echoed in his mind with new resonance. He had been interpreting events literally, chasing surface clues, and missing the underlying structure. The intruder's game was far more intricate than he had realized. Dominic's gaze hardened. The darkness he had been navigating was not a maze without exit. It was a challenge, a test, a game that could be won, if he approached it differently. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had his determination. He would not fail again. He would not allow overconfidence or assumption to blind him. And above all, he would protect his children, his family, and the sanctuary of his home at all costs. Elena's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "It's time to rethink everything," she said. "And this time we do it carefully, strategically, with patience. The truth is not what it seemed. The intruder expected you to see it one way, but it's the opposite. You must be ready to turn the tables." Dominic nodded slowly, letting the exhaustion and despair give way to renewed focus. He realized that the darkest hour was also the turning point, the moment when clarity emerged from chaos, when determination replaced fear, and when insight replaced confusion. He rose, gripping the key tightly, feeling its weight anchor him. He had been misled, overconfident, and nearly defeated. But now he understood. The game was far from over, and the real truth lay in the hidden patterns, in the overlooked details, in the threads he had dismissed. A faint sound interrupted his thoughts, a soft shuffle, followed by the whisper of movement just beyond the nursery doorway. Dominic's pulse spiked, but this time it was tempered by understanding rather than panic. He moved toward the source, ready, alert, and deliberate. The shadow appeared again, flitting along the hallway with unnatural precision. Dominic's eyes followed, but he did not lunge, he did not panic. He observed, calculating, preparing for the moment when the true path would be revealed. And then, a voice, low, deliberate, chilling, whispered from the darkness. "You think you understand, but you have only just begun to see." Dominic froze, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He knew now that everything he had believed, every conclusion he had drawn, was a fragment of a larger, hidden truth. The intruder's plan, the manipulation, the false leads, they were all part of a structure he had yet to fully comprehend. As Dominic followed the faint shadow down the hallway, he noticed a small envelope resting against the baseboard, one he had never seen before. The handwriting was precise, deliberate, and unmistakable. With trembling hands he picked it up, and as he unfolded it, the words inside made his stomach drop. "Everything you thought you knew is wrong, and the person you trust most is hiding the greatest secret of all. Dominic stared at the envelope in his hands, the words inside burning into his mind like a brand. Everything you thought you knew is wrong, and the person you trust most is hiding the greatest secret of all. His pulse thundered, and the familiar walls of the mansion seemed to close in. Elena stood nearby, expression unreadable, eyes fixed on him, waiting. He swallowed hard, fighting the surge of betrayal and fear. "What does this mean?" he demanded, voice tight. "Who is hiding what, and why?" Elena took a slow breath. "It's time you understood the bigger picture," she said quietly. "The intruder, the notes, the shadows, all of it is connected to someone you've trusted implicitly. They've been orchestrating events to protect you from a danger you didn't know existed. But the truth has been obscured, twisted to make you doubt everything, everyone." Dominic's hands shook slightly as he tried to process her words. "Are you saying you've been part of this?" The accusation, though hesitant, slipped out. He immediately regretted it. Elena's jaw tightened, but she did not flinch. "I have been protecting you, Dominic," she replied firmly. "That's all. But there's more than one layer to this game. The person behind it all. They've manipulated you using your assumptions, your instincts, and your trust. And now it's time to confront the truth." Dominic felt a chill run through him. For years, he had trusted few, and yet he had placed absolute faith in Elena. She had been his anchor, his shield, his secret weapon within the household. And now the possibility that she, or someone close to him, might be hiding something monumental shook him to his core. He set the envelope on the desk, pacing slowly. "Then tell me," he demanded, voice low but unwavering. "Tell me what I need to know. Who are we really dealing with?" Elena gestured for him to sit. He complied reluctantly, bracing for the revelation. She produced a folder from the corner of the office, sliding it across the desk. Photographs, notes, and documents spilled into view, forming a story that Dominic had only glimpsed in fragments until now. The photographs were unmistakable. Figures. He recognized scenes from places he had believed secure, but among them were images of Elena, always in the background, always watching, always guiding. He realized that every move he had thought independent had been subtly orchestrated, nudged, redirected by her presence. "It was never about deception," she explained. "It was about protection. You have enemies you've underestimated, people who would exploit any weakness in your household. The notes, the shadows, they were warnings, not attacks. I had to guide you without revealing everything, without alarming you prematurely. But now, you must see the full scope." Dominic's chest tightened. He felt a complex mixture of relief and disbelief. Elena had been honest in intent, but secretive in method. And now, the consequences of uncovering partial truths were surfacing. He scanned the documents, and then stopped on one that made his stomach drop. A file labeled with a name he had not seen in decades. A trusted business associate he had considered an ally, someone who had been a mentor in his youth. The file contained detailed plans, connections, and manipulations spanning years. The supposed intruder, the rival he had confronted, was merely a distraction, a pawn in a far larger game. Dominic felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by understanding. The warnings, the false leads, the staged threats, they had all been designed to keep him safe while guiding him toward clarity. And yet, the revelation carried a sting of betrayal. Someone he had trusted for years had deliberately hidden critical information. "Why?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Why hide it? Why manipulate me?" Elena's eyes softened, tinged with sadness. "Because the truth, delivered too soon, could have destroyed you. And the intruder. They are closer than you think. The stakes involve more than just your control over this house. It's about survival, Dominic. Yours, your family's, and the lives intertwined with this legacy." Dominic exhaled slowly, absorbing the magnitude of her words. He had been navigating a labyrinth without realizing the walls were shifting, without knowing who was guiding him and who was plotting against him. The mansion, once familiar, had become a stage for a complex battle of strategy, trust, and moral courage. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the hallway. A deliberate click, followed by a whisper too soft to discern. Dominic froze, recognizing the rhythm. The intruder was here again, observing, testing, waiting for the wrong move. Elena moved beside him, her presence a stabilizing force. "They're watching," she said quietly. "But now, you have the perspective they didn't anticipate. You understand the manipulation, and you have the means to turn the game." Dominic's gaze hardened. For the first time, he felt not just a reactive tension, but a sense of agency. He had been misled, manipulated, and challenged, but he now saw the framework of the deception. And with this insight, he could begin to dismantle it. He examined the envelope again, noticing a folded photograph tucked inside. It showed the triplets, smiling innocently, with Elena positioned protectively behind them. The inscription on the back read, "Trust the shield, but see the hands guiding you." Dominic's throat tightened. He understood now. Elena had been the shield, the guide, and the guardian. Every clue, every warning, every subtle push had been her doing. The betrayal he had feared was not hers. It was the careful orchestration of events to protect him and the children from an enemy still in play. A faint rustling from the staircase made him tense again. Dominic moved deliberately, keeping his movements measured, every sense alert. Shadows stretched along the hallway, and then a figure emerged, not the one he had anticipated, not the supposed rival, but someone entirely unexpected. A bystander he had considered neutral, someone who had remained silent throughout the unfolding events. The figure's eyes met his, steady and revealing, and then the words came, deliberate and slow. "I've known the truth all along. And now, Dominic, you must understand who the real villain is." Dominic felt the room tilt slightly, a rush of anticipation and dread washing over him. Elena's hand brushed his arm, a grounding presence, and he realized that the game was far from over. The revelations had begun, loyalties had shifted, and the real challenge, the true enemy, was about to step fully into the light. As the figure stepped closer, Dominic's heart pounded. The voice continued, calm and deliberate. "Everything you've been chasing, everything you've feared, was orchestrated to hide a deeper truth. And that truth will change everything you thought you knew about your family, your home, and the people you trust most.